All right, so my homily for today is going to be very educational. I did this for 4:30 and 7:30 last week, so it's only fair. I have a very simple but important message to give, and I have all the opportunity I need because in Mark's gospel today, Jesus is in full-blown parable mode. For our reading today, he gave two parables back to back. And the second one is one of the most well-known of the Bible. The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. So, I have a lesson that I will tell you in one sentence. And then we'll go back and see how that lesson applies to this specific parable of the kingdom of God as a mustard seed. So, are you ready? Okay. I will take that as yes. Here we go. The difference between a parable and any other educational story is that a parable always has more than one moral it's trying to teach for those who really listen. That's it. Parable equals more than one lesson. That's my lesson for today. Most other moral stories or fairy tales or analogies, almost always, they're teaching one thing. They've got one point they're somehow making, and that's fine. That's good teaching technique. Teaching one thing at a time. Fine. Jesus does something different. He teaches more things at once. When he gives us a parable, there is often a very clear message. He is teaching a lesson that even a child can understand. But then, he adds something deeper that only clever listeners will pick up on. And by the way, the disciples are rarely that clever. The disciples are constantly asking Jesus what he was talking about after the fact when they're in private. So it's tough. Not even the disciples knew fully what Jesus was saying at the beginning. So if you want an example of this, think of the Good Samaritan. Okay? There's that obvious message of be kind to people in need. If you see a dude bleeding on the street, help him out. He probably needs your help. Anybody can understand that. Everyone can agree with that. But I'll tell you, that parable is also about racism, prejudice, and humanism. Kids aren't going to get that at the first reading. And by the way, when I say humanism, I mean the belief that all people are capable of being moral, and all people know the difference between right and wrong. I know that word has a lot of meanings these days. I mean the classic sense that all of us have the capacity for goodness. All that's in the parable. So, getting back to our gospel today, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. I am aware of at least three things that Jesus is trying to teach us. The first one, like I said, is totally easy. A mustard seed is super tiny, but it rapidly grows into a pretty big bush. And so, good things have small beginnings. Okay? A little bit of goodness yields great fruit. No problem. We can all understand that. The second thing Jesus is trying to teach us requires a little bit of biology from us, because a mustard plant is a weed. Okay? Now, it's a useful weed because the seeds are edible and actually kind of tasty, but it's a weed. A mustard plant can choke and overrun a garden in very, very short amounts of time. And once a mustard seed takes root, it's very hard to get rid of that plant afterwards. So what Jesus is saying is the kingdom of God is strong and invasive. He's saying that when something gets the power of God's protection, that protection is there to stay. And just as birds rest in the branches of a mustard plant, we rest in the goodness of God. And every so often we have attackers that try to hack away the branches of that bush. But they grow back right away. So it is with God's presence in our lives. God's kingdom comes and stays regardless of the opposition. And finally, the third thing that Jesus is trying to say requires a little bit of history from us. You see, it was very typical back in Jesus' day to compare a strong nation with a tree. Okay? So a powerful, glorious nation like Israel in its heyday was like a gigantic cedar towering to the heavens. It provides shade for all creatures, great and small. Birds dwell in its branches. It produces fruit. It provides firewood. It's great. It's a noble image. And we hear it all the time in the Psalms. Okay? Like Israel is the tree of God's people. But then along comes Jesus, and he says, well, actually, the kingdom of God, the greatest kingdom ever, isn't a tree at all. It's an ugly little weed bush that grows wherever it wants, whether you like it or not. And that must have confused his listeners. I mean, that's like asking, hey, what part of the toolbox describes your family? Oh, we're hammers because we're strong and decisive. Good answer. How about you? Well, we're the needle-nosed pliers. We're good with small details when accuracy counts. Good answer, too. How about you, Jesus? What part of the toolbox is your family? We're all nuts. Why would you answer that? But that's kind of the answer Jesus gives us today. He says the kingdom of God is an ugly little bush you don't want in your garden. I can't blame the disciples for being confused about that. I'm confused about that. I'm not sure what Jesus is saying. I think he's telling us that we're not the biggest tree in the field, and that maybe true citizens of the kingdom of God, maybe we're like birds that dwell in the branches of a mustard plant. No bird has any need to be jealous of the other birds, and there's plenty of living space for everybody. I think that's what it's about. I could keep on talking. I could keep on telling you what I think this passage means, but I'm not going to. Because a parable needs to be pondered upon, and I need to leave a little something for you all to work on your own. Just one little corner of the puzzle. So, I hope that you give it a try. And even if you don't come up with a good answer today, I hope that you ponder what Jesus was talking about. Why is the kingdom of God like a mustard seed and not a gigantic cedar? Because whether you come up with an answer today or not, pondering the truth of a parable is to live as a disciple of Christ.